I must have been 3 or 4 years old when I underwent an eye surgery to correct the vision in one of my eyes. Before the surgery, I met with a priest who prayed with me because I was frightened of the surgery. During the surgery, I underwent anesthesia and all was well until I felt my chest hurting. I thought to myself, won't the pain end? Won't someone please help me? God, help me, when will this end? I was then suddenly rocketed out of my body and I could see myself on the surgery table. The doctors were all scrambling and I thought to myself, why are they acting like that? I feel great. I was then pulled upwards from my body. I thought, well, I guess this is it. Goodbye, body. I was then taken into a tunnel by an individual made of light. I had seen the individual before the anesthesia was given to me. When I first saw this being, I thought, who are you? No answer came at that time, nor did an answer come while I was being led through the tube of light. Then I was inside a void with the mysterious being. I asked this being, who are you? And the being said, who do you want me to be? The being then took on my mother's voice and said, I can use this voice if it makes you comfortable. When I declined, the being switched voices again and talked in my deceased grandfather's voice. I felt more at ease then. I was given a life review while inside the void. During this review, I told the being to pause. I wanted to better examine the parts of my life. I was then able to view these events from overhead. The life review did not last long because I asked the being something that surprised it. Can I plan my next reincarnation? I asked. The being said, usually people wait until their actual death to choose their reincarnation. I was persistent because I already knew where I wanted to go, Japan. I was then taken to Japan via an overhead view. The being and I looked at various cities until we reached Numero in Hokkaido. I told the being that I wanted to be reincarnated here. Then I was given a temporary glimpse into my next life. All I remember about this part was that I was male and was wearing a dark-colored coat that was accented by a stylish autumn scarf while I stood in front of the train station. Then I returned to the void. I was suddenly dragged back into my body as the doctors restarted my heart. The revival soon failed and I was pushed back into the void. I was back with the being. The being asked me multiple questions during the reincarnation conversation and will allow me to be autistic during my next life as well. Near the end of the conversation, I asked, wait, can I see my grandfather? And the being said, not yet. For the sake of my mother, I returned permanently to my body. After the surgery, I thought to myself, I saw an angel, but did not speak about it to my parents. I strongly believe that I will be reincarnated in Hokkaido during my next life. I believe our souls get some choice during the death process. Some additional things about the experience. I was informed that I would develop mental illness during my 20s. So far, this has been correct. I am typing this out during my most logical moments because I fully believe that this event will occur and that I will be reincarnated after I die. It was nearly 28 years ago when I had my near-death experience. I was 12 years old and in junior high school. I had an accident at a school function and was accidentally hung by a rope around my neck. I was alone at the time of the accident, and I remember looking for something to stand on to pull myself up. I was frantic. Then I remember looking at myself from an outside perspective. The next thing I saw was a bright, loving light. It looked like a million light bulbs close together, forming one huge, loving light. I went towards it and was pulled through to a place where I remember feeling peace and love beyond measure. I was then welcomed by so many people I knew and loved. Some were people I knew only in heaven before coming to earth. The love and happiness was so strong. I don't remember seeing bodies, only energies or auras. We communicated telepathically. They were surprised I was there so soon. Then I was shown to a spirit guide who led me to a building that had Greek columns out front. It was a massive building. Then I was brought to a room full of other people and their spirit guides. Each of us were standing around something like a circular table. It had a dome in the center of the table. I looked into the dome and started my life review. I could witness and experience my life from many different perspectives. I felt what others felt from my actions from their point of view. It was hard to go through, but I knew it was to learn and grow from my time on earth. I remember hearing others cry, laugh, and other things because of what they did on earth. My spirit guide told me it was okay and that we are all loved, that this was not a judgment. I was told that we all learn best by experiencing it ourselves. God does not judge us. We are all learning beings. The hardest part of judgment comes from feeling our lives from so many different perspectives. I could take as long as I wanted because this review was to learn and gain empathy. Then I was taken to a room where the energies that had a really hard time with the life review were put to sleep to recover and heal. They were surrounded by a loving white light. I was shown a place where everyone has a preset life on record chosen by us. I was shown my life path. Reincarnation is real, but it is our choice to incarnate. We do so to learn and grow. God is love. We are sent to earth to love and be loved unconditionally. Heaven looks just like earth and is unbelievably beautiful. I could travel anywhere just by thinking about it. Time doesn't exist in heaven. We are all beautifully and wonderfully made. The image of God is the emotion or energy of love. I was then told that I would need to come back to earth. I didn't want to come back and I fought it. But I was told my mission was to speak to the world about my experience and to teach that God is love and our purpose here is to show love and kindness to everyone. Heaven is real. The next thing I knew, I was on the ground being given CPR. For months later, I remember being depressed because I wanted to go back. I have only shared this experience with only a handful of people. However, I am feeling the pull to share my story. It is difficult because I am a teacher and I live in a very conservative area. Many of the things I experienced even go against my Christian religion. I do not hold all the answers. I believe that there is a God and I cannot deny the existence of heaven. I believe that whatever I believe, that if it resonates with me, helps demonstrate love to others, and gives me peace, then that is my truth. I can have bits and pieces of what I personally experience in an NDE and still find peace going to church or hiking in the mountains, etc. It is my connection to God's love that matters. I have been highly sensitive to iridescent lights and loud sounds since my NDE. I also find myself to be highly empathetic, and it seems all my senses were extremely heightened since this experience. I'm not sure why I remember so much from my NDE. I feel blessed to not fear death. I know we are all here for a purpose. I am more aware of my actions and behavior towards others. I try to show kindness and love to others. Life is a constant work in progress. I know that God is love and heaven is real. I hope this gives some of you comfort. Thank you for letting me share. My experiences are very human related, mostly of seeing people who have passed on. My first experience was when I was young. My uncle, who had passed on, came to me and said goodbye. Since this experience, I have seen quite a few deceased people who were usually visiting to say goodbye. They were wearing recognizable clothes and appeared like they were in another dimension. I also saw 3 dead women overseeing a fatal crash where they were killed. They were hugging each other and overlooking the scene. These are rare experiences for me, but I will outline the most significant visit, which happened in the mid-1980s in Victoria, Australia. My wife and I had visited and her family in Tasmania for a quick visit. This was many years before this happened. My sister and I rarely spoke on the phone and email was not available. Essentially, we had little contact. I was visiting my parents as they had rented a holiday house. My sister also came up from Tasmania with her 3 boys. My sister's husband was killed in a motorcycle crash in Tasmania about a year before this experience. I did not attend the funeral due to work and never spoke to her as my mother conveyed the news. I was never told the details of his death, except that he ran into the back of a truck and was killed. Later in the day, I was relaxing, reading a magazine in the lounge room. I had to go to work that evening. My sister was doing dishes in the kitchen. I noticed a figure standing with his arms folded and looking out of the window. He wore a white shirt with horizontal green stripes, fawn-colored pants, and black shoes. He did not seem happy. I yelled jokingly to my sister that someone was here. She entered the room and I described what I saw. She stated that it was her husband, wearing what she had buried him in. She brought the clothes especially for his burial. He came toward us, and I could hear him clearly. He was not happy about a boyfriend she was seeing, what she was doing on their small farm, and other issues. She answered when I relayed his questions to her. She appeared to know what he was talking about. I had no knowledge of her activities or relationships. This went on for about 10 minutes. He then moved away, kept a distance for a short time, and then left. When we told my mother, she was shocked. She is a practicing Catholic. When talking to my sister's husband, I noticed that his shirt collar was done up to the top of his neck, and that one side of the collar was fitted up at an angle. I never mentioned the collar to my sister, but did mention it to my mother, who attended the funeral also. She said they had to raise the collar due to injuries he had received. I had presumed he would have received chest injuries. I have many science books on NDEs, and have been looking for a scientific answer to this occurrence for many years, but to date cannot find it. If any light can be shown on an explanation scientifically, I would be very pleased. I was 2 to 3 months old. I remember finding myself up against the ceiling and looking down at a baby. The baby was lying on its stomach and very unwell. As I looked at the baby, I said, unconsciously, "That poor baby is so sick." I felt so much remorse and sadness because the baby felt terrible. It was roasting with fever and couldn't breathe. I looked across the room and saw a glass humidifier emitting steam. I realized the baby had pneumonia. I then had a panoramic vision of the room. The baby wasn't in a nursery, but a dining room with the table and chairs pushed across the room so the crib could fit. The room had wallpaper with ships on it and olive drab full-length curtains. The room looked out to the front of the house with 2 big windows with bushes in front of them. It was dark and the house was quiet. I realized years later that the baby was me, and when I was about 4 years old, I walked into the kitchen of our new house and recanted this story to my mother. Everything I had told her was true. I had pneumonia when I was 3 or so months old. They had moved my crib downstairs because the master bedroom was downstairs and they knew I was seriously ill. I described the room to a T, including the vaporizer that I can still describe. It had a rick-rack pattern around it, like Charlie Brown's shirt. My mother asked me several times, "Who told you this?" Because we had moved from that house when I was still very young. I remember it now like I had remembered it then. It's just as vivid 56 years later. What I remember most was the empathy I had. I was so sad and felt almost guilty that the baby was so sick. As I grew up, febrile seizures were a way of life for me. I would spike a fever in a half hour sometimes and have seizures. Each time I got sick, and I was sick a lot, that same guilt would spread over me. So odd. It happened when I was working at a construction site carrying bricks, as I was financially responsible for my family at a young age. It was early morning when I was carrying bricks on my back and going up the zigzag stairs made temporarily against the outer wall of the 4-story building when I fell with the bricks to the bottom. Afterwards, I was lying on a bed covered with a white sheet over my face, and I saw my younger sister collapsed and wailing on the ground. Simultaneously, I was going up in the sky and saw the city of Seoul. Over in the distance, there was a commercial airplane getting ready to land at the airport, and I went in and flew around on the tops of the heads of the passengers and looked around, even inside the cockpit. Then I looked at the Christ the Redeemer statue at Rio de Janeiro, the Eiffel Tower, London Bridge, Sydney Opera House, and places around Hong Kong. Suddenly, I saw in front of me images like a movie, playing everything I had ever done in my life, from the time I was too young to remember any of them. When I was shown times when I had stolen a radish from a field because I was hungry, when I swore at someone, when I spat on the ground, hitting my younger siblings, etc. I felt tremendous pain in my heart when those actions were displayed in front of me. I remember vividly trying to avoid watching it, but it was to no avail. While watching those scenes, I felt repentance for the bad actions I had taken deeply from my bones. Like being blown by a strong wind. I was inside a pastel-colored deep fog which blew me to an extremely clean, bright light in the distance. When I arrived, this color, like of a baby chick, encompassed me with feelings of extreme peace, and I conversed with an existence that I could not see, and talked with feelings of thought, and felt the answers. I knew there was an existence, a being, that was in the distance, but that I could not see. I had no physical body. I just existed inside extreme peace with great-sounding music coming from somewhere. Suddenly, I remembered my siblings and thought of wanting to see them. And as soon as I thought this, I was with my siblings in our hut. And while looking at their faces, I felt nothing. As soon as I thought of a place, I was instantaneously there. And while listening to the stories inside the bright light, I felt and realized that it was love. I saw overwhelming lights of fireworks in the darkness outside a window. I wanted to go and see it, so I struggled off the bed I was lying on and fell to the floor. My body felt limp, like it had no bones, and I couldn't make any sounds to ask for help. I don't know how long I was on the cold floor, but someone laid me back on my bed, and it was then that I was told that I returned from the morgue. When I was discharged from the hospital, I was known as the child that died and came back to life. So the hospital deputy director and all the nurses came out and sent me off. While I was resting at home, I would see things that are hidden in people that are walking on the streets, the thoughts that they have in their hearts and where their hurt lies. Knowing what people were thinking as they passed me was fun at first, but seeing it continuously became difficult. Several years later, I went on a business trip with 3 senior work colleagues to Hong Kong. I was able to successfully guide them around from the time we were on the plane, as I had seen it all before. When we arrived in Hong Kong, I remembered a fruit stall in a small alley behind the hotel we were staying at, and purchased a bunch of bananas to the amazement of my colleagues. When I go overseas, I'm able to go around like a local because I recognize the streets I saw during the experience. Even now, I am able to see people differently, and after retirement, I am currently lecturing around giving talks on life and death. I am working hard to bring to the public discussions of life after death and the meaning of dying well.